Welcome back, everyone, to another teaching moment here on the Canadian Immigration Institute. I'm with my fellow co-host, Chanelle Rosenbaum. How are you doing, Chanelle?
Good, thanks, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. So this summer has been quite interesting. We've got a new 18-month post-grad work permit extension and all of the assorted challenges that come with applying for that. In this video, you guys, we're going to talk about how illegal work, and you guys know that a lot of you went through that through the pandemic, how it can impact when you're trying to apply for this amazing new 18-month work permit. All right, Chanelle, have you had a consult or two about this issue? Has it happened?
Yeah, couple. There's a lot of concern amongst applicants. I guess you've got a lot of people now in Canada who finished their studies, finished their postgraduate work permit during the pandemic, and then got stuck waiting for this extension, which was coming for so many months. And for some applicants, it was nearly a year that they were waiting without a work permit, which is a really long time to have to support yourself without an income. So I do sympathize with a lot of these applicants who have had, I guess, no other option really during this time but to continue working. And there's a lot of you out there. So we want to address what the impact of that is and actually what the loophole is that we currently have to get around it.
Yep.
Um,
That's the
so
key right there. The
there is a
loophole.
loophole.
Yes.
Just in this circumstance, just for the 18-month postgraduate work permit extension applicants. Unfortunately, this doesn't apply to other work permit holders who've worked illegally, and we would never, ever encourage or advise you to work without authority. The key thing to do when your work permit ends is to stop working at the same time. You really do want to avoid unauthorized work in the future.
All right, let's touch on all the areas that we're going to address here. So we're going to talk about the 18-month post-grad extension, what it is, what is unauthorized work, because sometimes people are confused about that. What happens if you, that's you, worked illegally, how the public policy, this loophole that Chanelle was talking about, can save you, and what should be your next step. So let's back up here and let's start with item number one. What is the 18-month post-grad extension? For those, I don't know how in this world anyone wouldn't have known about it or heard about it, but give us a quick little overview of what it is.
So IRCC have been empathetic to postgraduate work permit holders during the pandemic who haven't had the same opportunity that they normally would have in normal times to gain the work experience and to spend that time in Canada. It's been very hard on a lot of people. So to make up for that and to allow applicants the opportunity to gain the relevant Canadian work experience, to pursue PR applications in the future, they have allowed this one time. Technically, it's the second time. They did it for applicants whose work permits expired earlier in the pandemic as well. But for this group of applicants who are eligible, it is a one-time 18-month extension, allowing you to continue gaining Canadian work experience now that the world is mostly back to normal. So it's a little bit of a lifeline for people who were really affected by the pandemic. And I assume if you're watching this video, you probably already know about this extension or have already even applied for it.
One thing we do want to point out, we will refer to this as an 18-month extension, post-grad extension, because you guys refer to it, and technically IRCC refers to it as that as well. But it is not an extension of your post-grad work permit. It's actually a brand new work permit that has its own rules, its own parameters, its own loopholes that do not exist in the context typically of a post-grad work permit. And really, the only time you can extend a post-grad work permit is if the original one wasn't issued to the full time that you would have or should have been allotted because of, say, a passport that's expiring earlier. So this is its own entity through a creature of public policy. And let's talk a little bit more about it. So, like you alluded to, throughout the pandemic, there were periods of time where people for whatever reason, had to do something that they probably shouldn't have done, which is work without clear authorization. As you alluded to, with the permanent residence programs being stalled out, and in fact, all the way back to September of 2021, there were no Canadian Experience Canada, the CEC draws happening through Express Entry. And so without those draws, that was what people typically used. They would apply for permanent residence. Then when they got their invitation to apply, they could apply for a bridging open work permit. But that all came to a crashing halt. And so month after month after month passed, Chanelle. And I remember back in, it was probably January or February, I had this discussion with Minister Fraser. What are you going to do about these international students who are running out of time on their postgrads? You issued a postgrad extension. Once again, extension is you guys' word, not mine. In 2021, are you going to do the same? And in fact, with the Canadian Bar Association, we submitted a submission to the minister outlining, number one, that he needs to do it now. For whatever reason, he waited and waited and waited until July. And then finally, this announcement came out, and many people had fallen out of status or had to switch to a visitor status. And how do you support yourself? This policy goes all the way back to September, right, of 2021. So you've got individuals that have been out of status or without a work permit for months and months and months. So we're now faced with this situation of unauthorized work. So maybe you can just touch on it, because some people think, oh, immigration doesn't really catch people. So is it really unauthorized? Well, what does IRCC look at when they're trying to assess this?
So unauthorized work is any type of work that you have done in Canada without a work permit. So IRCC, they do catch people. They will look at your employment history. They can sometimes speak to your employers. They can look at your tax records. If there's anything that sparks some concern or something that doesn't really match up to them, that's when they can look into it in more detail. And if they discover that there was unauthorized work beyond the expiry of your work permit, then that can actually result in you being banned from your next work permit for at least 6 months. So it does have consequences.
Yeah. And I'll point out one other thing too. So people say, and this is so common, oh, you don't need to say anything, IRCC, they'll never find out, right? Have you guys heard that? Have you heard your representative telling you that? That's garbage. Here's how it often happens. You've got a friend who's working with you. You're getting more shifts than them. They're getting kind of ticked off because they know your work permit expired, but your employer just keeps on employing you. Hey, they've got a social insurance number from before and they just keep remitting taxes and employing you because, well, they need someone and you're the person that's been working. And they say, well, if you don't say anything, we won't say anything, except that coworker of yours who's kind of ticked off because you're getting more hours decides to get on the phone and call the hotline for reporting unauthorized work, the tip line, and lo and behold, IRCC now becomes informed. They let the Canada Border Service Agency inland officers know, who then come on your door or potentially opening the door to Subway and seeing you behind the counter and asking to see your work permit. So that's how it plays out. And I don't think a lot of people, Chanelle, fully realize that it's often those closest to you that inform IRCC, or you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend that's kind of irritated with you and you break up and they call immigration themselves. So it happens in all shapes or forms, but clearly if your work permit's expired and you keep working, it's unauthorized work. Now, Chanelle, what if someone fell out of status, and this is a little bit out there, but it's important for people to understand. Let's say their post-grad work permit expired and then they applied to restore their status through one of those goofy little frivolous, work permits. And you'll remember lots of people were filing work permits, even knowing they had no chance of approval, to benefit from this maintained status. Well, some people were restoring to that work permit when they know it was going to be refused. Can they return to work, or could they have returned to work?
If you have a pending work permit application, then technically, as long as it was submitted before your current work permit expires, technically you are on implied status.
Yes.
I won't go into
what if they didn't submit it, Chanelle, until after the post-grad expired and they were restoring status? Okay, I see this a lot. Does that just make everything all better?
No, you only end up with implied status if it's submitted before your work permit expires. So if you've applied for a new work permit after, that doesn't give you the right to return to work. You actually have to wait for that work permit to be approved which if you weren't eligible for it, it will never be approved.
Yes.
So we did see a lot of people trying this trick
Yes,
and
we did.
playing
So
dumb, trying to use that as their excuse.
exactly. So you guys know if you've worked without authorization. So what happens, Chanelle? What happens if an individual is applying? And remember, once again, this is your 18-month post-grad work permit extension 2022 version. This is all we're focusing on now. None of the things we're talking about now necessarily apply to any other unauthorized work. It's only in the context of applying for this special, well, this is the second go around. Maybe there'll be a third one in 2023, but for the 2020-2022, what happens if you worked illegally? Everybody's telling these people, don't worry about it. Don't say anything. Just keep silent on the application because it asks on the 5710, whether or not you've worked without authorization. So what do people do? What should they do?
So, well, I mean, the worst thing that can happen if you worked illegally is you try and cover it up. And then later on in either this application or in a future application, even your PR application, you get found out and then that becomes misrepresentation because you lied in your application. And, if you're found to have worked illegally, the prohibition for that is starting at a 6-month ban on being issued a work permit. But for misrepresentation, it's a 5-year ban. So that's really the key thing you want to avoid is misrep. Declaring the unauthorized work is a much safer option than trying to cover it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the loophole. Let's take a look at this public policy, Chanelle.
Yes, So we have a blog post on the topic that we have written on the website. And in that, we've included the details of the public policy, which you can use as your way to get around this if you are currently eligible for this 18-month postgraduate work permit extension.
So this is it. Maybe you can just kind of hit on it just a little bit.
Yeah, so the public policy here, the wording of it is the public policy waives the regulatory prohibition of work permit issuance under paragraph R203E, where there has been unauthorized work or study, unless the applicant has engaged in unauthorized work for an employer described in section R196.1.
And that's a banned employer. So you can't work for an employer who's banned from participating in the foreign worker program or the international mobility because they're bad. So that one isn't saved. So don't work for them.
That one's never saved. So, but in for everybody else, if basically what this is saying is that the regulatory prohibition, so the ban on issuing you a work permit, if you have worked without authorization, that ban is waived in this circumstance. So this is you're given a way around it by IRCC. They're being lenient in this case. This is something that we suggest you flag up in your application. If you have worked without authority, draw the officer's attention to this section of the public policy because there's a chance it's a new officer reviewing your file who isn't familiar with this. You always want to flag it when there's a public policy or a rule, something in place that actually will make you exempt from this sort of ban, something else like similar to this in the future. Draw their attention to it.
Yes. So Chanelle, it's interesting with this public policy. I think really what they're getting at, and part of the reason we're sharing this with everyone, is that people who are telling you not to declare it are just stupid because the policy removes the consequences of that illegal work and it removes it all the way back to September of 2021. So if you fit within those parameters all the way through, you then have the ability to safely and securely declare it. Now, with that being said, I highly recommend if you are in that situation that you book a consultation with us before you submit the application so we can sort through everything. But in the context of this public policy, if you declare it, if you disclose it, the harsh consequences of having them give you a 6-month ban from, receiving a work permit and potentially, finding you inadmissible and even removing you from Canada, those harsh edges are blunted. And in effect, they allow you to fully disclose, but you have to do it correctly, right? You have to make sure that when you're dealing with it properly, that you're doing it correctly. So what options do people have? Because you've alluded to the fact that they should refer back to this, but my goodness, like this is complicated stuff. So do you have any suggestions on how people can do this? Because you know as well as I do that you need to declare it, but in your blog, you've got how to declare it.
We've explained it here. The first thing to do in your application, in the background information section of the application form, the question is asked, have you ever worked without authority? And you must say yes to that question. You must answer yes, and you can provide a little bit more information in there. There is a character limit to how much information you can type out in the form, so you'll have to keep it very brief. But what we recommend doing is refer the officer back to a letter of explanation that you include with your application, which explains your situation in more detail and addresses this public policy, bringing it to their attention. So we have actually prepared a draft letter of explanation that you can download and use. You can edit it to suit your circumstances with your own information, but this is a good starting point for preparing that letter to include with your application.
And all you have to do is just click right here on the link. It'll take you over here, and then you can download the letter right here off of our website. And that, I think, was a phenomenal little tool that Chanelle built to help individuals in this situation. It's one thing to declare something within your application, but how you describe things and the way you present it can have an impact on the result. And so we always say that you can fix this and you can benefit from that waived consequence, I guess, of illegal work if you do it correctly. So that's part of the reason why Chanelle created this as a free tool and a resource to help people make sure that their letters of explanation regarding that unauthorized work are properly disclosed in the context of, once again, just this post-grad 18-month extension for 2022. So there we go. Anything, and there's a link in the description below so you guys can have access to it. But what do you think, Chanelle? Is there anything else if you could add to this this little message that we're trying to get out to people? This message of warning, but yet this message of, well, happiness and relief, I guess.
Yeah, so I the key thing is, if you're in this situation, don't panic. There is a way around it. If you don't qualify for this 18-month extension, I would still suggest don't panic. There is a way to disclose it to save future applications. If you end up with a 6-month ban on work permits, that is not the worst thing that can happen in an immigration application. Really, the key thing to do is avoid misrepresentation, and you need to do that by ensuring you declare everything in the first application you ever make to IRCC. So all the way through. If you make a permanent residency application, but for your study permit, you misrepresented yourself, that can still catch up with you later on in your future applications. So be extra careful. And if you don't fit this straightforward criteria that we've outlined in the blog post and this letter, if it's not of help to you, then we highly recommend booking a consultation, talk through your specific circumstances with us, and we will help you to create the best possible argument and option to get around this in your application and set yourself up for success in future applications.
Exactly. And what do we sell, Chanelle? We sell peace of mind. We sell a good night's sleep. And for those of you who have been in this cycle, and I know who you are, where you somehow innocently or maybe not so innocently committed some form of misrepresentation on an application, there is a pathway forward for you. And like Chanelle said, go to our website. A link is in the description, and you can just click on Speak to a Lawyer, and you can scroll down right here, and you can see you can book a consultation with Chanelle right here, 25 or 50-minute consult to talk about it. And the best part is that, like I said, you can return to a good night's sleep. All right, exactly. Chanelle, thanks for joining, and we'll see all of you guys again in another teaching moment. Take care.